Good afternoon to UK Column viewers and listeners. I'm delighted to have J. Michael Waller back with me, author of Big Intel, How CIA and FBI went from Cold War heroes to deep state villains. So I'm going to say to the audience that if you've not come across this book before, have a look online and do think about getting yourself a copy. It's extremely interesting analysis, historical and operational analysis of what's been going on inside the CIA and the FBI in America. Now, Mike, thank you very much for agreeing to come back for another chat with me. We were just saying off camera a few moments ago that we don't seem to have problems covering material. So I've got lots of questions for you today. Welcome to UK Column.
It's nice to be back, Brian.
Thank you. Well, I wondered if we could start off with asking you about the Trump assassination attempt. I've obviously watched that incident develop, the reporting of it, at least in the press and the media, and I certainly thought there were some strange things as I watched the initial footage. And over the past, whatever it is now, a couple of weeks, we've seen a lot more questions arising about the security that was provided for Trump, and also the reactions of the sniper teams. Also, some controversy over preparations by the intelligence services themselves in scoping out the site where he gave his speech, and of course that's ultimately resulted in the resignation of the Secret Service Director, Ms. Cheadle. So let's jump straight in, and I wonder, what are your thoughts on the assassination attempt on Trump?
Well, the first thought is it's shocking to everybody how sloppy and unprofessional the Secret Service come. Here's the agency that was created just weeks after the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln in 1865, and you would think that they would be the best of the best, doing the best job they possibly can. And keeping in mind there can be human error. In this case, though, it looks like serial ineptitude, almost like a deliberate ineptitude, as if they didn't really care if they did their job or not.
That's a pretty strong statement. They didn't care whether they did their job or not. What have you observed that's concerned you about the incident itself, and what measures were and were not taken to protect Trump?
Well, the first one was pretty basic in that they left a direct line of sight between a rooftop and the former president, who is now the Republican nominee, and so this is one of the main people the Secret Service is bound to protect. Usually in a case like that, where there's a line of sight, the Secret Service would have a very large vehicle or something else placed in the way to interrupt that line of sight. They didn't even bother with that. So with the video footage we're seeing now from other people with cameras in the crowd, one could see the shooter actually walking along the roof line with his weapon in the minutes leading up to the shooting. So there's no excuse for that. Another one is the actual, I'm not faulting the agents themselves as individuals, that is the people on the ground. It's really the problem with the management. The whole management of Trump's personal security detail was incompetent from the start, and it gets worse the more we hear. But from what any witness could see on the ground, if you have a man who's 6'4" tall, a very large man, who is being guarded by people too short to be able to cover him and to get between him and the bullet, that's a problem. It's not a problem of the agent who's of a different stature. It's a problem of the organization of the security detail. So when you saw the Secret Service agents pushing Trump down the way they did and trying to push him off the stage, one of the agents in front was about a foot too short to be able to protect him from his chest to his head. She did the best she could, but she wasn't, she would have been better in another spot. Then we learn how the Secret Service is deliberately putting people in those positions in the name of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So now you're not putting the best of the best in these positions for political or for not partisan political, but for ideological reasons to diversify the people around the person being protected, which is something that's just outrageous. You have to have the best of the best.
You've jumped straight into the hot topic for me, because when I was doing some research around this, I stumbled. I wasn't really looking for the angle of the diversity, equity, and inclusion, the DEI angle, but I stumbled over a series of press articles, and they were grouped together not only on DEI but also on misogyny, and basically this was a pretty strong backlash by the bigger press and media in America, saying, well, these horrible online people, I think some of them were branded right wing, are making these vile claims that it's the use of diversity, equity, and inclusion which have destroyed the ability of the Secret Service to use agents appropriately. But they were very much taking it that it was a personal attack on the female agents that were present to protect Trump. And those media sources were clearly very protective at any idea that there was a problem with providing security because of the use of these policies. But you're going right to the heart of the matter and saying, yep, these policies have impacted the quality of protection that the Secret Service could provide.
If you had a woman who was a 6'4", very athletic person who was the best of the best and could protect the presidential candidate, that's fine. So it's not misogyny to say that the person there was too short and the other one was in fact too overweight and out of shape to holster her weapon properly, and then too poorly trained to even know what to do in the event of a shooting. And so we saw the one female Secret Service agent. She did her very best. You can't fault her for doing her very best. She put her life on the line. But her colleague was photographed cowering behind Trump with her hands up like this, not knowing what to do. And then that same individual back at the presidential limousine was pulled out her weapon and was holding it in kind of like a Hollywood pose with her head going back and forth, wondering what to do. And then she couldn't holster the weapon again properly because her belly was in the way. Well, come on, what kind of first-rate protection is that? So it's not being misogynistic to point these things out. It's just being practical. And then you look at, well, why were these agents placed there? And that's because Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle was following the Department of Homeland Security directive to put diversity, equity, and inclusion in all hiring and promotion decisions. And so it was for ideological reasons that these physically substandard bodyguards were put in those positions. But then also you didn't have a drone operative. Normally, if you have an element of personal security that's not functioning at that moment, or if you have a threat, so here's two counts. There was a visible line of sight where the Secret Service did see somebody on the roof. They normally would have said to President Trump, "Excuse me, sir, we're going to have to wait until we clear a possible threat up there. We're going to delay you 10 or 15 minutes." And Trump is fine with delays because he's usually late for his rally meetings. And the second one is you had the drone for security of the area was inoperable until it was way too late. So why would you have, on those two occasions, you would still tell the person being protected that it's okay to go and speak when it absolutely was not?
The other thing I observed from the video footage was the length of time that members of the public in the crowd were actually shouting and warning that there was a man acting suspiciously, and then there was a man climbing on the roof, and then there was a man on the roof. They described his arrival and the fact that he scoped the place out, and then he climbed up onto the roof. And yet, with all the crowd shouting that, there didn't appear to be any direct reaction from the police or the installed security team. And I found this quite extraordinary.
Right. Yeah, there's some evidence that some local police did try to do something, but their radio communications were not compatible with the Secret Service, or whether there was some other reason that they were disregarded. This gets us back in part to the deterioration in training by the leadership of the Secret Service, because your best eyes and ears on the ground can be the local population. And when the locals see something, you should listen to them. But in any service that considers itself elite, it's going to consider itself above everyone else. And then when you have a Department of Homeland Security that houses the Secret Service, whose ideology is that the people of this political persuasion, that populist American citizens in middle rural America are deplorable, they're weird, they're people not to be regarded as citizens, that their opinions don't matter, then people in those services are not going to regard what they hear from locals who they consider to be idiots. So that in itself, it would be poor police, law enforcement, or protective work if you're not listening to warnings coming from the public.
As you say that, into my head comes a little bit of my own military background with the Navy, and that is that you can if you're at sea, you can be following the best navigational equipment that there is. You can have all of the charts, all of the depth information, but at the end of the day, local knowledge from the local fishermen can often warn you of something that you'd never detect on your own. So don't dismiss local knowledge. It is certainly something that works at sea as well.
Yeah.
The other thing here is that obviously the then boss of the Secret Service, Kimberly Cheadle, came under huge pressure in questioning as to what actually happened. And I've got a quote here that she said that it was the most, or she admitted it was the most significant operational failure at the Secret Services in decades. But then she didn't want to open up about anything that would happen, that had happened. Do you think her reticence to answer questions was simply trying to protect herself, or was there something deeper that she was trying to deal with?
It was two things. She was trying to protect herself. If you look at the answers that she gave, these are the types of ways you go to Congress or to court to be evasive. In fact, you wouldn't be this evasive in court because the judge would take action against you. Speaking in the passive voice, speaking in indirect terms, not answering yes or no questions just by giving a long monologue. These are all things that they're coached to do before testifying, so that they can look like they're saying something and not be guilty of lying before Congress or contempt of Congress. So she was covering up for herself because she was the one immediately responsible. She was the boss. But she was also covering up for her boss, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, who's one of the most ideological figures in a very ideological administration. That's Alejandro Mayorkas. And she's also covering up for a system-wide policy, which is deliberately lowering standards in order to fulfill ideological principles. So she was in the hot seat on that. And if she had come forward and said, you know what, it's my fault, it's my leadership problem, I hereby tender my resignation, she would have been forgiven for a whole lot. Just as the Capitol Police Chief Stephen Sund, on January 7th, 2021, right after the riots, he tendered his resignation immediately and then arranged for an orderly transition. She did no such thing. She said she was going to stay on, and she knew she had top cover from Secretary Mayorkas and from the White House.
And so it was only when that pressure built and built until it was untenable that she finally decided to step down.
Right. And then her replacement, I mean, look at him. He gave more direct answers, but he acquitted himself extremely poorly. He spoke also in the passive voice as if it was the shooter's fault that the Secret Service itself was not prepared. Now, of course, it's the shooter's fault for what the shooter did, but it's not the shooter's fault for what the Secret Service did or failed not to do. But Acting Director Rowe's passive voice in all of this shows, again, he's not really accepting responsibility, and he's trying to shield someone or something.
Right. And now, with respect to Rowe, I came across an article which I found very interesting. It was a claim that whistleblowers were releasing information that actually the Secret Service had been informed of a number of things. So I'll just read this quote out. It says, a whistleblower has alleged to my office that the Secret Service Counter Surveillance Division, the division that performs threat assessment of event sites before the event occurs, did not perform its typical evaluation of the Butler site and was not present on the day. This is significant because CSD's duties include evaluating potential security threats outside the security perimeter and mitigating those threats during the event. Now, the article itself also suggested that the whistleblower had said that Roe reacted very badly to agents that raised concerns about the quality and the level of protection on the rally site. So Roe appears to be incredibly defensive himself, as you say.
Yeah, and he's also not taking blame, and he would have been the one where you have the director of the Secret Service is the boss, so she's responsible for everything that happens. He was much more closely tied to the actual protective details, but they're also covering up for the decisions to make sure that more resources went to a very minor event by First Lady Jill Biden, also in the state of Pennsylvania that day, and letting it be known that the Secret Service needed more resources. Now, anytime a bureaucracy needs more resources, especially in the security area, they're going to get the resources they want or that they need. That's seldom been a problem. But in this case, for some reason, the Secret Service didn't have enough agents. It didn't have snipers. It didn't have a means of communicating properly with the state and local police forces. And so it was lacking resources for the political rival of the president of the United States, who then was still running for re-election. So then it causes a lot of other questions. Why was the system and the leaders of the system in such a state of mind that they weren't providing the best of the best security for a political rival? They weren't providing Secret Service protection either to Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's running as an independent rival of Biden. And of course, the Kennedy family has been plagued with political assassinations, for the past 60 years or more. So they weren't even, the White House repeatedly denied Secret Service protection to Kennedy. And this was repeated active refusals, not simply incompetence, but policy decisions not to provide this protection. So you really have to wonder what is going on in the leadership of our country when they are not making sure that the lead candidates for public office with the highest threats against them are not receiving the protection that they're entitled under law.
Thank you for that, Mike. I wanted to ask you what you felt about the Biden administration. You've now said, well, they weren't providing resources which they should reasonably provided to any high-profile speaker or presidential candidate, certainly. Is this just mismanagement by the Biden administration in your view, or have we got political control, party political control over the security services? Is that what's going on?
It's a combination, and this is where we get into a really swampy area where you're at risk of pushing, let's say, a theory about a conspiracy. So it's a conspiracy theory, and then you'll be denounced for being paranoid or whatever. But imagine, look at all the facts we've talked about so far. And if before July 13th, somebody had put this argument together that these policy decisions are made, Trump's going to get shot as a result of it, people would have said you were a crazy person. But so I don't want to get into theorizing too much about what might have happened and just look at certain facts. And those are that these security services from FBI, Secret Service, CIA, all of the different three-letter places, they have been able to operate without real checks and balances. And they've been able to do this for many decades, and in some cases, ever since they were established. And this is really dangerous in a democratic republic, because you have, where you have government by consent of the governed, now you have government by bureaucracy. And when you have bureaucracies that have become politicized within through hiring decisions from the entry level on up and through management decisions from the top on down, you can't really trust those services to act in the impartial way that we expect them to, even if we don't expect them to operate perfectly. So, as I wrote in Big Intel about the FBI and the CIA becoming not only politicized for partisan means, but ideologically radicalized, we see the same pattern now with the Secret Service based on what we've learned since the assassination attempt.
Yeah, this takes us back into the heart of your book, because that's where it started, with your warnings about what was happening to these agencies. Subversion. Just to ask you the question: Is this ideological change subversion, in your opinion?
Absolutely, it began this way. This is not just a simple question of society's changing, so the nature of our security services are changing because the security services come out of the society that they're protecting. So this is just part of change. This is not. This is an ideological agenda that has been refined over many decades, but you can trace it back, as you can in the UK, with the radicalization of MI5 and MI6 and others, and the Tavistock Institute. You have a radicalization that began a century ago, a little over a century ago. And the purpose was to deliberately undermine Western democratic societies, to create revolutionary change through the legal systems and through the social and educational and media and entertainment, to create that social revolutionary change that could not be achieved through violence in, say, the Bolshevik form. So this began at a meeting in 1922 in Moscow about how to do that. And then they set up an institute in Frankfurt, Germany, that's shorthand called the Frankfurt School. And then when they were active in trying to undermine, polarize, and tear the center out of Weimar Germany, and then have their communist revolution once the whole center of German society had been destroyed and the country had been polarized. But unfortunately for the world, the Nazis had a similar idea to polarize, and then they were better equipped to take power than the communists were. So these Frankfurt Institute people fled to Switzerland, France, UK, and the United States to set up their revolutionary movements through universities and institutions in those countries. And so we see what we have now a century later. And you can trace this back genealogically. It's literally like following a family tree. You can go from the sort of the red thread of custody of this ideology from one generation to another, and you can trace it back person to person chronologically.
Over the last few days in UK, we've had street riots in a number of cities around UK itself, and this is my local paper. You might not be able to see it on the screen, but the headline is "Protest Brings Violence to the Streets of Plymouth." So we've had rioting, we've had people hurt, police hurt as a result of bricks and rocks being thrown at them. We've had a lot of damage to property. And these riots have involved both white people and Asian people from the immigrant community in UK. But suddenly this has erupted across the country. For UK Column News yesterday, I reverted to some of the analysis by Christopher Story, talking about the creation of circumstance in order to put pressure on the public and bring on breakdown of society. And I did this to try and get people who are feeling very emotive that at the moment immigration in UK is the whole problem, and we've got to look at the Muslim community and the Asians. And I was trying to get the audience to reflect on something deeper, that there was a hidden hand here that was undermining all levels of society. The police were being undermined themselves. tension was being created in communities. And above all, we were saying to the audience, don't get involved in violence, because if you get involved in violence, you're actually going to lose the battle with a very well-armed state. But it was very interesting, the reaction from the audience, because a lot of people had not seen some of this material before. And they never actually thought of the idea that there was something dark operating within society to break down our institutions. And in our previous discussions, you and I have been talking about that breakdown occurring in the United States for yourself, and certainly for UK here. So a lot of tension at the moment in UK as a result of those riots over the weekend, and a lot of people searching for answers as to what's actually going on. Now, I came across an article that you'd written about events in Capitol Hill when supposedly a crowd simply turned riotous and then invaded the premises. But you gave that account as a first-hand witness. You were present on the edges. And I wonder whether you take our audience through some of the things that you observed. And I'm just going to say I was very taken with some of the headings in the article that you produced, because you talked about a motivated crowd, but there was a sort of festive atmosphere. So initially the crowd starts off being lively, but not threatening in any way. And most importantly for me, that you also say that many people in that crowd were extremely pro the police, who they regarded as there to protect them. But as events unfolded, tear gas was used by the police. And then you commented that people in the crowd were asking the question, why are our police attacking us? And I found that a very emotive statement, because again, over the weekend, many people who'd gone out for what for them was a peaceful protest had then said, well, the police suddenly turned on us. So take us through what you observed in all those amazing events in Capitol Hill.
Sure. Yeah, that was on January 6th, 2021. And I live on Capitol Hill, so it's my neighborhood, just a few blocks away from the Capitol. And so it was at a time where I was sort of, I've gone to hundreds of protests as an observer, as a participant, covering them as a journalist, sometimes as an organizer. So you know how things work. And it was a festive atmosphere, going from the White House, where Donald Trump was still speaking, to a very, very large crowd, and then the march heading over to the Capitol. So the police and the city of Washington, D.C. had issued permits. I think it was 7 permits to 7 different individuals and organizations to have protests on city property. And so by getting a permit protest, of course, the city knows, or in issuing them, the city knows about how many people to expect, about how many portable toilets to put out there in the streets, about how many police officers and the types of police units to put out there, and so forth, and then to coordinate with other agencies to make sure there's not going to be any trouble. So nothing unusual at all. So these were people from Middle America. It was people of every age, people of a lot of people in their 50s and 60s, and people in no shape, or no physical shape, or no mental condition or character, I would say, to cause any rioting or cause any destruction. These were just ordinary people, working people, a lot of off-duty and retired police officers and retired military, super patriotic bunch of people. And they went at their own pace from the White House, about 16 blocks from the White House to the Capitol. But among those people, and it was very festive. They had people, sharing, refreshments that they had with them, and even people picking up litter that they found in the street. It was all very nice, except you would see these different cell groups of 3 to 6 people dressed in the same type of clothing, whether it was tight black clothing or some type of camouflage. Some had tactical helmets on. And they would run ahead of everybody. They wouldn't associate. They wouldn't say hello. They wouldn't stopped to look at all the landmarks, because you could see how many people were out of town by everybody's looking up at the different landmarks and buildings and so forth. None of that. These people were with a mission. They were running ahead of everyone else in different small squads. And so I could tell there was going to be some kind of trouble. Somebody was organizing provocations, but I had no idea who. In fact, at first I thought it might be far left Antifa types, but I didn't see any of that when I actually saw the trouble. So going up to the Capitol, since again it's my neighborhood, I know when you stay away. I know when there's going to be an event. In this case, the flag was flying over the House and Senate chambers, so you could see the House and Senate were both in session. We knew it was a historical event because the vice president would be there to break a tie vote. This was to certify the American elections and for president. So it was a really, really big deal. But the hurricane fencing and the signs to tell people not to enter a restricted area, by the time we got there, they were gone. So this was about 5 foot high, heavy plastic hurricane fencing, and then there were sort of bicycle rack type low level barriers. They were put to one side and very neatly, sort of perpendicular to the way that they should be. There was no police loudspeaker system, the way the Capitol Police always has one. And you can hear, living in the neighborhood, they drill with this every couple of months, so everyone can hear very loudly any orders or whatever orders the police give. There was none of that there. So people just went right up to the Capitol, the way you normally would on a regular day. Not a single police officer could be seen. They didn't have any canine units of any kind. And I thought, well, this is really strange. They should have more security here because there are a lot of people coming in a very small area when both houses of Congress are in session. And of course, the Supreme Court is located right across the street from the Capitol building. So you have 2 of our 3 branches of government with tens of thousands of people crowding around it at a very important time. And people were fine. The crowd was fine. They were spirited. They were chanting. Some of them were chanting in a loud, obnoxious way, the way you're going to find at any protest. But most everybody was in good spirits until all of a sudden, police from the Capitol building started firing tear gas and flashbang and smoke grenades into the crowd. So we couldn't see at the time. We were about 60, 80 feet away. We couldn't see at the time that there was trouble up front. But these are grenades being fired way into us and even behind us, 60, 80, 100 feet away from the site of trouble. And then that's when people started getting angry. Why are they firing at us? Nobody's doing anything. Nobody's hurting anyone. And it kept going and kept going and kept going. So it seemed like there was going to be a stampede of people to leave from what the police were doing with these crowd control weapons, because thousands or tens of thousands more people were still marching to Capitol Hill from the White House. And of course, they had no idea what was going on, but there was no way to escape. You had low stone walls or very high curbs on either side of these pathways, and no way for anybody to get out. So it was becoming a dangerous situation. So people started getting very angry at what the police were doing to them. And that was at the moment when the organized groups, and later on we're looking at our own videos and we could see they were marked with red tape, either on the back of their hats or helmets or on their shoulders. Orange tape, one unit worked with them. The blue tape was another unit. Red tape was another unit, and so on. Those were the ones pre-organized and pre-stationed to go up the Capitol steps and to storm the Capitol up on the Senate level, Senate chamber level, and then what they call the crypt level down below on the House side. They were organized in advance for this, and they were using the larger crowd as cover.
Well, there's a number of points there, isn't there? But tear gas, a low grade, we'll call it a low grade crowd control weapon, but still extremely unpleasant if you experience its effects. But if you use it on a crowd where people haven't got any place to run, this can easily lead to a really serious condition where people are going to be crushed by the oncoming crowd. They can't see if they've got tear gas in their eyes. They're going to be in a certain amount of pain, and yet you've got more people coming into the area. So you either say this is a very poor policing decision, or it was a decision designed to actually cause confusion and greater anxiety in the crowd itself.
Right, and the investigation showed, and Capitol Police Chief Sund showed that he didn't have the intelligence to know that there was going to be such a large number of people at that event, and that certain rival groups were going to be there. And it later turned out that his intelligence chief, her name is Yogananda Pittman, apparently made the deliberate decision not to inform him of this. So he could not marshal his forces properly. He could not request outside assistance from the city police or other state police. So you had police from other states, when they heard the news about the riot at the Capitol, they came down and they arrived before some of the federal authorities based in Washington, D.C. actually came on site. But, had Chief Sund known this, he could have marshaled his forces accordingly, asked for that National Guard assistance, or he couldn't have asked himself, but he could have asked his civilian bosses, because he answered to the leadership of the House and Senate, not to the executive branch. He could have said, look, there's going to be trouble. We need that National Guard support that Trump had been offering. But of course, the mayor of Washington, D.C. said, no, we don't need it, after Trump offered it days before. And the Speaker of the House, Pelosi, said that they're not going to want it or need it. So somebody made decisions along the way, and we don't know why they made those decisions, to make sure there was not adequate security there. So even of the 2,300 or 2,600 person force that the Capitol Police has, only a fraction of them were on duty at the time to protect the Capitol. Which again, with two sessions of both the House and the Senate in session, and the Vice President there to break a tie in this very historic vote to certify an election, he didn't even have his own forces marshaled properly for that.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of there's a lot of omissions in, breaks in the chain of command, or bad decisions being made, and this is before people start even asking, was something deliberate? In this case, it was just a chain of either incompetence, negligence, or willfully doing nothing in order to let a bad situation get worse, even at a time when it could have been prevented days in advance.
This is the plausible deniability conundrum, isn't it? Is it cock up, or is it conspiracy theory? It's difficult to tell, but whichever side of the line it is, something's clearly wrong. And you weren't just there as an ordinary member of the public. Well, you were there as a member of the public, but you were a trained member of the public. So I would imagine that your observations were a lot more acute than the average member of the public, because of your background.
Well, yeah, when you know how crowds work, and when you know how to organize protests, and you know how troublemakers work, it's a regimented thing. It's like being in the military. You can recognize certain decisions, and you can even anticipate certain actions, whether it's a naval action in your case, or how a military, an army group is going to operate. If you've been in there, you can pretty much either figure out what's going to happen, or you understand it when you see it, when other people might not see it. They wouldn't know enough to observe it. So it's easy to see when you notice. And then you have the other separate phenomenon, which is mob mentality, where some trouble starts, and people who go there who don't intend to cause any trouble at all, some of them get curious and they want to see what's happening. Others they see the excitement and they want to be part of it. And other people, like at a really good rock concert, they would just be stupid and let their better judgment get the best of them, and or lose their better judgment, and then join in with this crowd and do things that they ordinarily would never do. So you have that factor as well, where there was no criminal or conspiratorial intent there. It was just simple mob mentality.
In the article, which you originally wrote for the Center for Security Policy, you had 4 different groups of people that you were highly suspicious of. There were what you described as plainclothes militants, agent provocateurs, fake Trump protesters, and disciplined uniformed column of attackers. Just tell us a bit more about those 4 groups.
Yeah, and that was the observation that I had at the time, and I think I can still stand by that based on what I saw. So you had people who were obviously not Trump supporters. They were trying too hard. They were completely out of character. They were out of the norm, but they were all wearing similar gear. So, so people are, yes, you have local vendors selling things, and everyone's going to buy from that person selling hats or selling shirts or whatever else. But when you see them wearing their Trump hats backwards, and it's only the troublemakers who are wearing their hats backwards, you can see that, okay, that's their unit identifier. So that's one group. You had others who were just wearing plain clothes, and they might have been wearing Trump gear, but they weren't readily identifiable. But you could see some kind of order of battle among them. So in this case, when we were trying to evacuate the area as the serious trouble began, there were two guys several years older than me, so they would have been a Vietnam War generation, and they had a military demeanor to them. If they were, really senior non-commissioned officer, tough demeanor of people accustomed to working with enlisted personnel. And they were standing on those high curbs at the highest point of them, physically trying to hold people back and prevent them leaving that area. They wanted the area to become more and more and more full and more and more and more dangerous. And in my case, we went to climb up over that stone barrier to leave the area. And he physically grabbed me and said no, and was barking at me, "I need to get back there." Who are you to give me orders for anything? So you had that group of plainclothes agitators, and then looking around, you could see some of them had earpieces, some of them had climbed up lampposts, and they were all visible to one another, as if they were in situations to issue command. And then you had other fake Trump supporters who were carrying. A lot of people had flags, but in this case, there were two in this part of the Capitol area that had Confederate battle flags on very, very long flagpoles, and identical very long flagpoles. So I know just from experience, anytime you see Confederate battle flags at a conservative event, it's not old-fashioned Southern pride. These are people who are up there front and center to give an image for the cameras and for TV to show how racist and insurrectionist and treasonous the whole crowd is with that imagery. And of course, that imagery worked. It works every time. And then you had agents provocateurs within the crowd. So as in any good crowd, if you want to create a good impression and you're organized for it, you'll have people dispersed in a diamond-shaped pattern. So they look like they're normal and they're spontaneous, but they're all issuing the same chants. And then they get the rest of the crowd to issue the same slogans and chants. So I could detect that crowd pattern as well as agents provocateurs. But they weren't just saying patriotic slogans or pro-Trump slogans. They were saying really militant, provocative slogans to get people all riled up. So you could tell that those were the provocateurs. And then they were trying to lead ordinary people up toward the Capitol to go in and break the law and commit acts of violence.
So without putting words in your mouth, Mike, these four groups, what were they? Are they sort of accidental provocateurs, I have to use that expression, coming from smaller groups who are better organized and wanted to take control? Or do you think that the nature of the four groups you identified tends to suggest there was a bigger, more professional controlling power that was targeting that crowd as a whole?
It seemed at the time, but it especially seems so in retrospect, that there was a larger controlling power that had its own people pre-positioned, but also had others who it was able to exploit. For example, the Oath Keepers. In that article, I referred to a column of men dressed in tactical gear coming through in one single regimented march, and some of them had Punisher skull patches on them as a unit identifier. Those were the Oath Keepers. And I had heard that at the time from others in the crowd, but I didn't put the name in the article because I didn't want to be, since that's an organization, I didn't want to defame an organization unless I knew for a fact that it was the Oath Keepers. But indeed, looking back at it now, it was, and some of them were tried and convicted. So that's an organized conservative and right-wing militia type group. So it's a legal organization. But what we later found was that the Oath Keeper leadership were FBI informants. So in this case, you have the FBI had penetrated and compromised the leadership of this group that attacked the United States Capitol, knowing in advance that it would do so. And no attempt was made to stop them from doing so. And indeed, every attempt was made to ensure that they succeeded. Now, so the FBI could have shut this down in a moment had it wanted to. And for some reason, the decision was made not to do it. That leads to the question, why?
Exactly, that is the key question. So we're asking the question, why? What's your answer to who and why?
I don't know why. I have opinions about why, but really, why would the FBI do this? Like in the question of the governor of the state of Michigan, Governor Gretchen Whitmer, there was a plot to kidnap and even assassinate the governor of Michigan. Well, it turns out it was a bunch of real stupid idiots who were easily manipulated by who? By FBI agents and by the FBI Detroit field office to plot in collusion with these undercover FBI agents to kidnap and harm the governor of Michigan. The FBI then went in, made arrests of a criminal conspiracy to kidnap and murder the governor of Michigan. And now the FBI is all heroic because they saved this governor from a terrible right-wing plot. But did they? Would these individuals have committed this plot on their own had they not been organized to do so by the FBI, which would then arrest them?
Yeah.
We don't know, but we do know that many of those people who were set up were acquitted in court because they had been set up and they had been baited into doing something they never would have otherwise done. But the special agent in charge of the Detroit field office who was behind all of that was then transferred to the Washington, D.C. field office to handle the January 6th work. So you really have to wonder, why was this agent with a proven record of running agents provocateurs to commit acts of violence against democratically elected leaders of our country? Why was he why was he not disciplined? Why was he not fired? Right? Instead, he was put in the most important field office in the country, Washington, D.C. So there are all of these questions. And then when the FBI director and when other senior FBI figures were called before Congress to answer questions, they were asked repeatedly questions like, did the FBI have any assets or personnel who were involved in planning or executing criminal acts of violence at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th? It's a simple yes or no question. And the FBI would not answer the question. Time and time and time again until years later, the FBI director said, well, no. But why didn't they say no from the beginning? Because the answer wasn't no. Why did the FBI have those assets there? Why didn't it take every possible measure to stop this from happening and tell why? Now the Capitol Police doesn't have their own intelligence unit. They get their intelligence from the Secret Service, the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, the Washington, D.C. area police. So they get it from them. So if the FBI had its own agents involved in the attack on the Capitol, and Chief Steve Sund of the Capitol Police was never told about it, then you have the federal government from the executive branch using its forces to subvert and commit acts of violence to disrupt or even stop the constitutional process of certifying votes in the Senate and the House, and the police chief responsible for that, who answers to the Senate and the House, was never told. Now you have a constitutional crisis that's created by our own security apparatus. It's not even political. We still don't have answers to those questions.
This is a phenomenal point which all members of the public, whether it's in the United States or here in UK, should pay attention to this. My feeling, I can only give my opinion, my feeling is that we've got similar sorts of tactics being used in UK at the moment to help inflame these these troubles, which are largely caused by excessive immigration, which is a policy which we can easily show goes back to the political system, where continually governments on the left and the right have lied about the number of people coming into this country. Now we got to the stage where people are unhappy and they're trying to do some. Some are hotheads, some are going to go on the streets and, yep, they're going to break windows and throw rocks. But there's a lot of very good people, both sides of the line. They can be people who are long established people here in UK, or they can be long established immigrants who are also concerned at the open borders policy. But now the hidden hand has taken it to violence on the streets. And of course, what has come in as a result of that violence, we've got our new Prime Minister Keir Starmer telling the country that he's going to bring in all sorts of draconian controls to deal with these, quote, right-wing extremists. And my intelligence, my own brain power says that I'm watching something different happen. I'm watching people being manipulated in order to get a desired outcome, which the state wanted in the first place.
Yeah, and it's very similar, where the threat is always coming from right-wingers. It's not coming from the people who are actually there to commit acts of violence. And you mentioned hotheads in crowds. And we get, you get those everywhere on earth. There's always hotheads, but even a lot of hotheads are at heart good people. They're just hotheads.
Yeah.
But what about those who are not hotheads, but they have been trained and emplaced and mobilized and funded in advance to cause these riots? Riots don't just happen spontaneously from city to city by the same types of people rioting about the same things. These riots are organized. And when they know that the police won't do anything against them, and when they know they can cause provocations against normal citizens or against hotheads who are from the population of the say the disfavored majority, then they know they can continue to commit these acts of violence pretty much without any government surveillance of them or paying any legal cost. And this is how these riots continue, and how historically people have lost their countries.
Yeah, there's a lot to think about. We've probably just got a few minutes left, but one other subject that I came across when I was preparing for our chat today was it was a document that essentially it's the new Secret Service research examines for the first time 5 years of mass violence data. So this has come out of the United States Secret Service. And essentially, it's an assessment which is based on behavioral, the behavioral threat. And I was very interesting to see that the introduction was signed by Kimberly Cheetle herself. And the key team are people who are, sorry, I need my glasses for this, embarrass myself. They're both social science research scientists. And I'm very interested in this because, again, in UK, we've got a huge amount of research done into the behavior of people in order to identify whether they're going to be a future threat. Is this actually thought crime, which is being generated here? But here was a whole document which was released a little while ago, looking at a number of very serious incidents in America, whether it's been shootings in the schools or other violent crimes on the streets. But we've got a whole raft of people now looking at the public, to my mind, almost as though the public has become the laboratory specimens. And then I say to myself, well, okay, if your behavioral analysis of the public was so good, why did these crimes happen in the first place? So you've got the public under the spotlight for who they are and what they think and what makes them agitated or why they get excited. And then we've got events taking place but it doesn't appear that this behavioral assessment is preventing the crimes which they suggest it could. Not sure I've explained that very well. I'm just suspicious of the whole use of the so-called social scientists in order to deal with what are security issues, but you might have a different view.
It's pretty much along yours, and it's just as murky as what you were trying to explain. It's here. If think of the huge social science resources we have in both our countries, and social scientists, whatever that is. It's hard to think, how can you take something social and be a scientist about it and treat it in a scientific way? But if they are indeed scientists the way they claim, then they're going to use data and they're going to be unbiased in their assessments. And you don't see that at all. You see the conclusions are almost always it's a certain demographic of the population that is the most prone to being violent or otherwise dangerous. And it's that group that needs to be demonized. And it's the others who are usually made up of or led by provocateurs, many of them who came to our country legally or illegally for the purpose of being subversive and causing trouble. They somehow always manage to get off free from any kind of blame to continue to do what they want to do. And in fact, they're hired on in the social science community as subject matter experts. So we had this here in the United States over the years, whether it was the loyalists of the Soviet Communist Party, or people being paid or having their academic credentials funded by the Chinese government or the Communist Party, or whether it was the Iranian regime or the Muslim Brotherhood, or you name it. It's overwhelmingly people in those areas who are hired as subject matter experts or even trained as scholars with the university credentials that they have to come out and then write these reports that guide our security services.
So just to be clear, what I was looking at, what I am looking at, is United States Secret Service National Threat Assessment Center. That's the body that actually put this document out. And interestingly, if you look at the bullet points in the executive summary, they describe people who've got problems in their lives, in essence. So it starts off saying that most of the attackers had exhibited behavior that elicited concern in family members. So there was some form of trouble with the individuals. Some of them were physically aggressive. Half of the attackers were motivated by grievances. Well, the moment somebody's got a grievance, there's something wrong in their life. They're unhappy about something. Then we've got people who are depressed or suicidal. As I read through each of these bullet points, I'm thinking what you're describing here is a society that is on the verge of breakdown. In a community, we have a rising number of people who've got problems. And so why are we suddenly surprised that these people are now doing things which we don't like? So which comes first? Is it the breakdown of society which is causing the dissent and the grievances and the problems, and those people then attempt to do something to solve the situation by creating a mass event to get recognition? Is that what's actually happening? People are being broken down and therefore they're reacting? Or is this just normal? And yes, the agency is doing something effective by analyzing the behavior of the public to pre-warn of a crime.
If you ever met a lot of these social sciences and scientists and spent any time with them, you'll see that a lot of them fit the same profiles that they're applying to others. They're depressed, they have grievances, they have terrible family troubles, they feel alienated, they're angry. So they're the ones who are diagnosing the rest of the public. And then with the increased rise, and as you're pointing out, the decay of society and the rise in mental illness and the grievances that even normal people will have, and the injustices they see in their own government with, say, a two-tiered system of justice, where people standing up for their national traditions are being discriminated against and even arrested, while newcomers coming in to destroy those institutions get favorable treatment. Of course, that's going to produce more anger, but it's not the new troublemakers that are going to be blamed and held accountable for it. It's the people who are trying to defend what's always been there, that defend their national traditions, who are seen as the evildoers. What you have, though, when these social scientists come together and make reports the way you just summarized to the Secret Service, is that they're painting a huge segment of the society as prospective enemies. And therefore, that logic demands more and more and more resources to a national security state and a surveillance state to watch everyone before they commit a crime. And this is where you get George Orwell walking right in. And now all of a sudden we become Oceania.
Yeah, Mike, serious stuff. How do you see things going in the States at the moment? You've been analysing this breakdown and subversion of society. How do you see it proceeding in the United States at the moment?
I'm not optimistic. And I'm not optimistic because it's not just a question of changing leaders of these agencies. This has been going on for decades. And so if you have people who were hired, let's say in the year 2010, they're halfway through their careers now. So if they came in at the lowest levels of the system, they're halfway through. They're mid-level management, they're mid-level agents, they're mid-level analysts. So, and then the people ahead of them were promoted for ideological reasons, not for reasons of competence and professionalism, but for diversity, equity, and inclusion reasons. These are those with real grievances, and they're parts of cell groups that feed those grievances, that fuel those grievances. And so they're the ones who end up inordinately getting promoted through the system for reasons other than professionalism, which drives a lot of the professionals out. So you have our FBI, our CIA, our Secret Service, our Department of Homeland Security, a lot of our military, where the really professional people are leaving because they can't get promoted. And in our system, if you're not promoted within a certain amount of time, you have to leave the service. So it's a self-purging system that has become institutionalized, and a hiring system. If you go look at, say, FBIjobs.com or at FBI on Twitter X, you'll see that the recruiters are targeting the same DEI, critical theory-minded younger people to become agents and analysts. They still want professionals in the science and technology field, but they want the diversity DEI types to be as the actual agents, analysts, and managers. And this is really dangerous, because then you're setting up an apparatus that becomes frighteningly close to what the one-party regimes had set up.
I think we have to end on that very serious point, but I'm going to thank you for joining us once again, and also for having the courage to stand up and warn both the American public about this and now the UK public. It's a very dangerous hand operating, and it takes good people to stand up and tell the truth about what's happening. So a big thank you from us.
Thanks for having me on, Brian.
Okay, thank you.